Hi there, and welcome to another interview. Today I've got the wonderful, fantastic Nayiri, and I'm going to ask her the question I ask absolutely everybody. Hey Nayiri, why did you become ketovore?
Hi, Stephen. Thank you for inviting me to your channel. Oh, why did I become ketovore? Well, I was a vegetarian for 30 years, from the age of 19 to the age of, 48 and a bit. So I was a vegetarian, and I mean, the short answer is I didn't thrive on the vegetarian diet. It caught up with me, as they say. It was fine in the beginning. I was 19, I was young. My protein synthesis was probably happening naturally on plant proteins, and I had no understanding of nutrition at the time. I was young and dumb. And I thought if millions of people were doing this around the world, and this was luckily pre-internet. So it was in the early 90s. So we didn't have that influencers influencing. And so I wasn't really being influenced as such. It was just a personal decision to stop eating meat because I developed, since I was a child, an aversion towards meat, because I actually saw we were passing by a butcher's shop, and I actually witnessed a little lamb being not necessarily slaughtered, but being pulled into the butcher's shop. And I knew, I was like 8 or 9. I knew exactly what was happening. And I developed this aversion towards meat. And I was 19. I decided not to eat meat. So vegetarian diet worked fine in the beginning. I didn't thrive on it, and it wasn't really good on my blood sugars either, because of course I wasn't eating meat and I was vegetarian. So I was eating eggs, but eggs would be something I would probably have like once in a blue moon. So the majority of the food on my plate would have been carbohydrates. Fast-acting carbohydrates, rice, pasta, and that sort of things. Until I realized, about 2 years ago, so I realized I can't do this anymore. I couldn't solve the mystery of why I was so fatigued. I couldn't solve it. I tried everything else. I took supplements. I was on a low carbohydrate diet, so my blood sugars were normal, because that's the first thing, Stephen, with your scientific background, you'll know about diabetes and blood sugars. So my blood sugars, if they were fluctuating, then all of that would have caused me fatigue and mood swings, and also fatigue and mood swings, but my blood sugars were fine, were normal, because I was already on a low carbohydrate diet. I'd completely removed the pastas and the breads and even the fruits from my diet. My blood sugars were fine. My HbA1c was normal. Or very close to normal. I could not understand why I didn't feel right. There was something missing. And part of me knew it was probably protein. It was meat. I didn't want to admit it. I tried everything else. I tried supplements. I tried increasing my fat intake on a low carbohydrate diet. I tried decreasing the number of eggs I was eating a day, because on a vegetarian diet, let's face it, the only protein source was eggs for me. One more egg, one less egg. Nothing worked. And then I started eating meat. And when I started eating meat, it was within a few months, I could notice the difference. I noticed that I'm not so fatigued that I could easily collapse at 1 p.m. anymore. So I had energy all throughout the day. I realized and understood that I was probably not absorbing or fully absorbing the nutrients from plant foods. So I started decreasing the plant foods and increasing my meat intake. And the more I did that, the better my blood sugars got, because as a type 1 diabetic, that's a priority for me. And the better everything else, my energy got. So I started feeling better. And of course, my gut health got better. on a vegetarian diet, I was already experiencing irregular bowel movements, probably IBS. I didn't get a formal diagnosis, but I probably had IBS or leaky gut or one of those conditions. And it was uncomfortable for me. So I knew vegetables had to be decreased and meat had to be increased. And this is why I call myself ketovore. So not fully carnivore, because carnivore is good, but I think people get very fanatical about what you can and you can't have. So I'm safer calling myself a ketovore, because then I allow myself the avocado here and there, or a couple of cherry tomatoes, and that's perfectly fine for me. I also drink coffee, by the way.
Yes. So you mentioned there that you're type 1 diabetic. When did you first know that you were?
I'm the classic type 1 I have the classic sort of story, because they used to call it juvenile diabetes because it mostly occurred in children. So I was diagnosed in 1978 at the age of 5. So as of now, I've been type 1 for 45 years.
And did you get a blood glucose monitor quite early in your life, or when did you first get into? You mentioned reading your blood sugars. I've been interested in that. When did you get access to that sort of data?
Okay. Initially, no. All throughout the 80s, we didn't have. I certainly didn't have, and they were relatively new, even in the States. And we're talking about the glucometers where you prick your finger and do the blood test. They were relatively new, so I didn't have access to those. I think in the late mid-90s, maybe, I had my first one sent to me by a relative from the United States, and it was like fancy, but I didn't have the replacements, of course. So I only ever used it when I felt like I had to use it. And basically, in short, I didn't use it. I didn't use it because I worried, what if I run out of supplies? And then I didn't. You see, when you don't have the proper education, this is where my passion will shine across. Because when you don't have, as a type 1 diabetes, you don't have the proper education. You don't feel empowered enough to take full control of your diabetes. You're just like a lost sheep. You'll make one mistake after another, and you feel, no wonder a lot of type 1 diabetics feel anxiety and mental health issues, because they feel defeated by the disease. So, but the more you understand what type 1 is and how to manage it, the more empowered you become, and the higher your chances of keeping it under control. So feeling like you're in control of it rather than it controlling you. I don't remember using it regularly, and even if I did, I wouldn't have known what to do with the figure that I'm seeing in front of me. So it was high at that point, and then what? You see, we see this a lot even nowadays when people wear a CGM, and I'm lucky enough to wear a CGM, the continuous interstitial blood glucose monitor. So it continues. I'm sorry, it's mine ringing, and I don't know how to silence it.
That's okay. I mean, I'll just
adrenaline rush, and it does happen, by the way, when I'm doing the interviews. That adrenaline rush will push the blood sugars high a little bit, and that's normal. I don't deal with it. I don't take extra insulin for it, because when I do, the minute this interview is over, I'm just going to crash. So I let it run high, and that's fine. It's similar to I know I'm going to jumping of topic here, but it's very similar to resistance training. When I'm doing resistance training, my blood sugar will rise a little bit. So I take a little bit of insulin then, but I know that as soon as my exercise is over, that insulin is just going to start having an effect, and I'm going to crash. So then I come home and I eat straight away. So, but it's a similar situation. So that was my CGM beeping. For anyone else who has a CGM, no, I know I'm human too, so I do have highs and lows.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I'm very passionate about, because, you know, when I did my specialist practitioner qualification in diabetes and obesity, I was shocked to learn that in the 80s, still people weren't able to access their own blood sugars. Then in the 90s, there was a big move to not let patients have their own blood sugar readings, and it was fought against. But you summed it up nicely. Once you've got the power and the knowledge over this way of eating, you control it rather than it controls you. So I think reading your bloods is really essential. And now I think people watching it now in 2023, just to date this video a bit, you know, you can get continual glucose monitors. And I thank you for saying it's not in the blood, it is the interstitial tissue, and it is you know, a calculation. Nothing beats, if you really want to know, nothing beats actually pricking your finger, but you can't do that every single minute of the day. So the CGM gives you a real good proxy, and it can tell you about the certain foods that you were told maybe were really good for a type 1 diabetic, and you can eat them and think, well, that doesn't seem to be the case when you eat it, because you can see the reaction. And I think that's one of the things I think is good about this technology, is people can actually say to themselves, right, now I've heard that bananas are great for me, or a Snickers bar is not going to be a problem, then eat it and watch what happens. And, you know, or cereals would be a great example in the morning. So do you have any particular books that you read, or, you know, like maybe Dr. Richard Bernstein, or is there any sort of people in your life that have inspired you to read more about this and learn more about type 1?
Stephen, yes, before I move to the books, you said something really interesting about, you know, the CGMs. When people wear the CGM, they see exactly what the impact of different foods on their blood sugar. And you can't unsee once you've seen it. So it's one of those sort of kind of seeing, right? It sticks in your head, and you'll learn a lesson, because you'll know exactly the same will happen next time you eat that huge pasta or pizza, rather. Pizza's the worst. But so I absolutely would recommend Dr. Bernstein's book. I mean, it's still the only encyclopedic level book on type 1 diabetes that there is out there. It's very thorough, it's detailed, it goes through the science, through the management, through the tips, hundreds of complications, diabetes related complications, and not necessarily diabetes related, but high blood sugar complications. So it's a very detailed book. I do recommend that people have it. I actually use it. I have it on my bedside. I've got the Kindle version as well. So it's easy to search something. Oh, what did Bernstein say? So it's not one of those books you necessarily can sit down in a couple of days and finish it back to back, right? But it's a must read for every type 1 diabetic. There are other books. There's Dr. Keith Runyon's, who's a nephrologist, type 1 nephrologist in the United States. He's written a book called Mastering Type 1. So that's another very good book.
Well, I think you'll be online. I was trying to tease something out of you, actually, which you're currently writing a book as well, aren't you?
I'm writing a book, so we'll see. We'll see when there is some of my type 1 journey in there, but I'm having second thoughts about it. I'm having now thoughts about separating the type 1 and then perhaps having it in a second book. It's taking time. It's taking a long time. It's actually taken longer than it was initially just supposed to be about metabolic health. Made simple and accessible to everyone. And then I started putting in the type 1 stuff. And then it kind of diverged, and now I'm thinking I need to revisit and see what happens.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it, with the information, especially as it evolves and there's more and more information coming on stream. You can write something and then the next day you think, oh, wow, I should include that because that's just been discovered, or that study's just shown this. And it is endless. And I can tell you, I wrote a book many, many years ago about called Step Away from the Carbs, which was on Amazon. So I've taken it down since because the information needs so much updating, just need to start again. But anyway, let's get back to you. So there will be some people out there that don't really know what type 1 diabetes is. So do you want to just give us a very quick explanation of what that is, what type 1 is?
Okay, yeah, but thank you for asking that. It's important that we mention it because, I mean, type 2 is the most widespread type of, I was going to say popular, it just not the right word. The most widespread type of diabetes, which results from insulin resistance. Okay, so it's kind of related to lifestyle, and it can be fixed in most cases with lifestyle or dietary changes, and that's type 2. Most people know about type 2. Now, type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune condition. So it's similar to lupus, for example. Lupus is an autoimmune condition. Multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune condition. So it's where your own body or your own immune system attacks different cells in your body, mistaking them as for foreign bodies, right? So in the case of type 1 diabetics, the immune system, your own body's immune system actually attacks the beta cells in the pancreas that produce insulin. So the beta cells get damaged, they no longer produce insulin, or they don't produce sufficient insulin to sustain normal hormonal functions and normal life. So it's either, in the case of type 1 diabetics, they're completely not producing insulin, or they're producing insignificant amounts of insulin to keep them alive and thriving. So type 1 diabetics will have to inject insulin. With the current technology, we have the choice of either to inject using syringes, of course, which have been around for decades now, disposable ones. So you just use it once, throw it away, or injector pens, as we call them. So you can, I remember there used to be another teacher at the school where I taught for years, and he had type 1 diabetes. He always had his pen in his shirt pocket. So it literally looks like a pen, but it has insulin in it. So they're the injector pens. They may be known in other names as well. And of course, there are the insulin pumps. There are the tubed pumps, and there are those pumps which don't have a tube, and they're usually called pods. Pod is what I do wear, and at the moment it's lower in my body, so I can't show it to the audience, but it is actually half the size of the old Nokias from the 1990s. So it's a small pod, literally, with sticky tape on the back, that you stick onto your body, and it has a small cannula, tiny little plastic needle, if you like. Some people may not be familiar with the word cannula. So it's a tiny little plastic needle that you insert inside your skin, and that's it. It has a little reservoir in it, which you fill with insulin before sticking it onto your body. And it carries enough insulin for 3 days. So you just change the whole pod every 3 days. So that's the one I have at the moment, and I love it.
Did you
After
find
30 years of injecting using various types of syringes, etc., I'm really happy with the pod.
I was going to say, did you find when you were a vegetarian that it was difficult to manage your blood glucose numbers? Did you find it more difficult than on ketovore?
Yes. Well, I had the CGM in 2017. So 2017, and here in the UK, we're both in the UK. Now I think they are all funded by the NHS, our National Health Service. So CGMs are funded for type 1 diabetics, not type 2s. However, back in 2017, they weren't funded. So I purchased mine in 2017 and used it nonstop until, well, I still use it, but now I don't have to self-fund it. As of last year, a couple of years ago, I think the NHS stepped in and they said, we'll fund this for you. But up to that point, I was self-funding it. So, so I could see that on a lower carbohydrate diet, which included a lot of non-starchy vegetables. So we're talking about salad greens, cucumbers, courgettes or zucchinis, as our American friends would call them. So my blood sugars were already normalized. They were normalized, and it was easy to manage blood sugars on a low carbohydrate, real food diet with just maybe a few eggs for protein. But it wasn't sufficient for me because I started resistance training and the protein was simply not sufficient. And this is why I was experiencing that fatigue. But also there are other nutrients. We look at meat and the first thing we think about, of course, is protein. And we forget the other nutrients which also exist in meat. And, you know, all these nutrients, you have the carnitine, you have the leucine, you have carnosine. So all of these can only be found in meat. So whether I was deficient in any of those, it's hard to tell because, of course, I didn't have a formal diagnosis except for B12, and I wasn't anemic. So I was told, no, you're fine. You're not low in B12, and you're not anemic either. So I knew that I had to start eating meat. But now with meat, initially, it was harder to manage my blood sugars because, of course, a portion of the protein, and not many diabetics know that, but a portion of the protein, dietary protein, a portion of those amino acids will actually convert into glucose. Now, looking at the science, we don't really know where that threshold is. I've read papers suggesting that it could be 30 grams of protein, but there are other studies also showing 45 grams of protein, but none of these studies were actually done in diabetics. And so it's hard to really know how much of that protein is being converted into glucose. But for me, I don't look at it as something that should bother me. I mean, it doesn't bother me. Okay, so because I'm not eating carbohydrates, I don't have any other glucose intake in my diet, and I'm only eating one meal a day, which means that I'm actually fasting minimum 23 hours every single day, and I am doing resistance training almost every day. So in my context, and I'm certainly not recommending this to every type 1 out there, but in my context, I don't think I should worry about a portion of the protein converting into glucose. I have to inject to cover the protein. I have to take insulin to cover the protein in my food. But because protein isn't like white bread, or it's not like fruit, so it doesn't really spike your blood sugars quickly, but rather it takes good 4 to 6 hours to spike your blood sugars a tiny bit, not a large spike, but just a tiny bump. What I do is I take my quick-acting insulin in tiny small doses every hour or every half an hour, depending on which way my CGM is trending. And so I cover my food. So, and all the insulin that my food needs for about 4 hours. maximum 6 hours, and then I'm done with it. So I eat my meal about 1 p.m. So by 6 p.m., it's the bulk of it is at least is digested. So my blood sugars are normal because I've been microdosing with small doses of insulin so that I'm not crashing. So my blood sugars are fairly stable. And of course, the rest of the time until 1 p.m. the next day, I'm completely fasting. So my blood sugars go right down. Insulin levels are minimal. Inflammation goes down, of course. The gut heals. And this way of living just suits me perfectly for now. So it might change. I will have to be prepared to change as our bodies grow older and we change, or hormones change. But for now, this is what I do, and it seems to be working for me.
Yes, fabulous. And I just want to cover a little bit more on the protein, by the way, because you mentioned starting resistance training and you felt the protein wasn't sufficient, which is really interesting. But just for the listeners out there, there is more nuance to all of this because, I've actually seen a study where it's been 100 grams of protein in one shot. So some of the nuance that's missed is also whether you're including fatty meats or you're going very lean, because if you don't produce bile, see, bile is actually, everyone thinks, well, bile deals with your fat, but it also deals with amino acid absorption. So if you have fatty cuts of meat, or you just basically leave the fat on bacon or a steak or whatever, you will get some bile, and that will help with the amino acid absorption, which therefore goes towards protein synthesis, rather than if you have lean cuts. So this is not medical advice. It's everyone's so individual. So some people might do better with lean cuts, some might do better with fatty meat cuts. It does depend if you're training, if you're sedentary, those sort of things. If you're eating 1 meal a day, the big plus there is your body's only got to deal with food once a day, which is great. But it does bring me to a really interesting question. Then, what about the dawn effect for you? Does it rise very strongly in the morning, or are you sort of pretty much on a sort of level playing field with your blood glucose all the time?
Well, there are a few type 1 diabetics out there who don't actually experience the dawn phenomenon, and I'm one of them.
Thank you, because I tell this to people and they don't believe it.
Perhaps, I mean, who knows why I don't have that? Perhaps because by dawn, the next day, of course, my previous day's meal was done by 1 o'clock or 1:30, right? By dawn, I'm really insulin sensitive. And so maybe that has a role to play. I'm really insulin sensitive. So my basal background insulin is at its minimum dose in those early hours. So to say that I'm covering my dawn phenomenon with a large dose of insulin in the morning, and that's why I'm not rising with high blood sugars, would be a lie, because that's not what I'm doing. Quite the contrary. My morning basal, or the background dose of insulin for those early morning hours, is very, very low because I'm really insulin sensitive then. So a small dose of insulin, literally, I'll tell you, it's like 0.20. 0.20 is barely a drop. 0.20 units of insulin per hour, all the way from 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. That's when people experience the dawn phenomenon, and mine is a tiny amount of insulin. However, that said, I'm not all lucky. Wait for it. What I do experience on a daily basis is foot on the floor phenomenon, which not many people know about. So it's actually a thing. It's called foot on the floor. So the minute I might be awake in bed, but the minute I decide it's time to get up, I put my foot on the floor, my blood sugar within 1 minute would rise from a normal, say, I don't know, 4.5. It could be 4.5. It would rise to 6.7, like 2 millimoles rise, which is crazy, absolutely crazy. It also happens at other times in the day when I'm really relaxed. say I'm on the sofa, right, or on the couch, and I'm relaxing, and then suddenly I get up because I remember something. Oh, I forgot to do that, and I just get up with that rush, and that rush just spikes my blood sugar instantly, and it's so quick, it's unbelievable. So I know that now. I expect that. So we're frequent travelers with my husband, right? So and occasionally we have to separate for business reasons. But when he's with me, he tells me, "Okay, I'm bringing you the coffee to bed." So if I'm having the coffee to bed, then I've had more time to. Then I'm not literally within 1 minute to another. I'm not emerging myself out of bed, so because that would spike my blood sugar. If I'm taking it easy and slowly getting up and I'm relaxed, that seems to stop that blood sugar spike. So what do? I just have to take insulin. It's going to spike and it's going to stay up there because generally people are more insulin resistant in the morning hours after waking up. For good 2, 3, even 4 hours, people are generally more insulin resistant. And so I know I have to treat it with insulin. So I don't let it run at, 7 or 7.5. That's like 135 for our American friends. I don't let it run high. I have to take insulin to bring it down again.
Oh, that's a brilliant answer. Thank you. So just to sum up, last couple of questions, and just very quickly, you went from vegetarian to ketovore. Could you list a few of the health benefits that you noticed by just changing?
Okay, so if you suffer any gastrointestinal issue, right, difficulty digesting, bloating, gaseousness, acid reflux, stomach pains, so all of that will go away on a low plant or even plant-free diet. I would just tell people to give it a go because we're a society that normalizes most of these conditions and we don't take them seriously because, of course, there's diabetes to deal with, there's heart attacks to deal with, people have mental health issues, and no one even takes gastrointestinal issues seriously enough. But I think we should. So if you are suffering, if you're bloated and you shouldn't be, and if you're gaseous, you shouldn't be, if you have stomach pains, tummy aches, if your bowel movement isn't normal, if you feel like you're not emptying your bowels fully, and that's, by the way, also gastroparesis, which is the slow digestion, which is a common diabetes-related complication. Try stopping the plants and just nourish your body with what it needs, because once you cut the fiber out, your sort of digestive tract will clear, and people say meat will clog up your intestines, and it doesn't, because what does clog you up is actually the fiber, which you struggle, or some people struggle to push out fully. So give it a go if you have any gastrointestinal issues. That was a massive benefit for me. Not to mention the energy, of course. I just seem to have endless energy now, and I wouldn't be able to feel like this on a vegetarian diet.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And just so people know, your website, which is lowcarbandfasting.com, the link is in the description, so that's always good. So you've beat me to the sort of what advice you would give to somebody trying it, because you've just said give it a go, which is excellent. Could you just tell us a little bit about I think you've got a Facebook group, haven't you?
Mm-hmm. I have a Facebook page. Thank you for asking that, Stephen. I have a Facebook page, and I have 2 Facebook groups. One specifically for my Middle Eastern audience, because a lot of them struggle translating the data into something usable for them. I cannot tell any of my Middle Eastern friends, for example, go carnivore. I have to be realistic, and people reaching out to me, I can't turn them away. I can't tell them, just eat meat and never mind, don't buy the insulin for your daughter or for your son for that month. So sometimes, in the West where we live, and we're very privileged actually to have that choice, to have the option of just eating meat. And that probably, for me personally, it doesn't really cost me more than what it would cost me if I were to fill the fridge with fruits and vegetables, for example. But that's not the case around the world necessarily. And so I have to work with people from different places of the world, even with people who struggle accessing insulin. And so my recommendations have to be more realistic and applicable to everyone. So I have a Facebook group for that group, Facebook group for the Middle Eastern sort of audience, but I also have a Facebook group for type 1 diabetics specifically who are doing keto and extended or intermittent fasting. So if you're one of those, or you're interested in finding out more about fasting, go to the website, because the group link is right there in the website.
Wow, that was a fabulous interview. I hope you enjoyed that. And if you like that sort of thing, I recommend you watch this one next.